I did not have to say a word. I really thank him.
We will also thank you for your note that some of us are meeting with Representative Ellison's office this afternoon during our advocacy visit, so we'll convey that message along as well on our behalf. I think that we are going to switch to the next panel, or do we have time for...
I have 11:10 and it says 11:20 on your...
Oh, thanks. There's a question up here.
This question is actually specifically to you, Gurwinder. I wanted to hear a little bit about whether in your schools there was community building going on between Sikh students and Muslim students and also students of color who seemed like they were maybe targeted by safety officers or bullying of other sorts, like whether there's been work that's been possible about alliance building around that.
Well, in middle school, not really. And I even was attacked by a Sikh kid once, and I was like, it was really messed up. In high school, there weren't a lot of Sikh students, and no one ever planned to like build a small community there.
And I think that's a great question, and Gurwinder's story is real, and we have a youth organizing program that's been working on a National Dignity in Schools campaign that sees the need for restorative justice practices within our schools to have alliances and dialogues. Children are children, children learn things from their parents, and one of the things we're seeing more and more is that the solutions are not bringing in more police officers into our schools, kicking kids out of schools into the school to prison track. The solution is teaching children what is the right way, and restorative justice, positive behavior supports, these are all national movements that are very much growing, and our community absolutely needs to have a voice in that.
And I would like to add, we do have crisis intervention training in schools. We need diversity and tolerance training also in the schools.
Okay, I think we've got, we'll probably take, I think, one more.
That guy in the back had his hand.
And there's a one in the back. Let's bundle these two up, actually. If you can keep your question short to about 30 seconds, and we'll bundle both of these up.
We have heard all of these sad and pathetic stories about Sikhs being pat downs and x-rayed and being treated very badly in the airports and by the TSA officials. Do you think it's about time that this group would make a resolution that we will recommend to the TSA that we would get a crash course on cultural sensitivity so that they would be more aware of the needs of our Sikh and Muslim and Islam brothers and sisters. So I would hope that the SAALT and other related organizations would make a resolution, give it to the TSA, that they would train their officials to get course on sensitivity and culture and ethics and etiquette. Thank you.
I'll let you answer that in a minute, Prabhjit. I just wanted to capture the last question, and I think you're over there.
Sorry, I'm also a student from Richmond High School, Queens, New York, and I wanted to know if, like, was there anything taken by the security guards or principals, guidance counselors, deans after the attack, after you've been attacked? Like, was there any follow-up about that, or like any procedures taken to like stop it from happening again?
At those days, I was kind of afraid because I didn't want things to escalate, or like if I always thought like what would happen after. So I thought if I reported to the dean or somebody, then they would come again and tag me again. So I never used to really tell anybody, and I used to just keep it to myself. So,
would you give any advice to like other South American youth, South Asian youth, like in the community to speak up or anything just so I can carry on back to them and share it with them?
Yeah, I think that they shouldn't keep things to themselves like me, and they should tell somebody and report this. So this shouldn't happen. This shouldn't be happening. Along with bullying and discrimination, it's very bad.
Thanks, Amanda. We're so excited to have you and other SAALT youth here. I think, Prabhjit, I'll let you have the last word on cultural sensitivity trainings for agencies.
Absolutely. And one thing I was going to say about New York City Public Schools is that after this incident and many other, unfortunately, incidents, the Sikh Coalition was able to basically create a law that basically allowed for harassment or situations so that there is an individual that you can report to, so that and there is a follow-up situation, so that harassment and bullying really ends in New York City Public Schools. But in terms of the question that you had on TSA, post my incident, I then went on CNN and we really, and New York Times, and we really did push to have these things change. One of the things that we were able to have happen is sensitivity training, which there is a video on Sikhs and culture of Sikhs that is mandatory across the board to all TSA officers. But the issue that we find is, too, the major one is the policies have really not changed, and that's why you've seen the instances. I wanted to say this, which is that unfortunately the stories are still there. The only difference is that the person's name has changed. That's the problem. It's because the policies themselves have error, because there's so much subjectiveness within the policy, which allows there's so much room for these policymakers that are giving to TSA officers to decide who they choose and who they do not. And I myself have had many instances where I've gone to the same airport, and within minutes of going through a metal detector and having to go through one again, one asked me to do a terror pat-down and another one did not. I mean, so how is that security? Because that clearly was the same person wearing the same clothes. So that's my answer to you, is that really what needs to happen is policy changes need to occur. Policy.
Thank you. So as part of this community briefing, please stay, and you don't have to switch yet. We had reached out to several members of Congress and various offices to take part in this briefing and to hear your stories. And I'm excited that we've got a representative from Congressman Honda's office here, Ahmed Badelia. And Congressman Honda unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but he is someone who has been a very strong supporter of issues affecting our communities for quite some time. In fact, he was the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus until just very recently. And with the King hearings especially, we know that Congressman Honda stepped out in front and lent his voice and talked about his experiences as an internee during World War II. And we appreciate so much of what Congressman Honda has done for us, and I'm excited to introduce Ahmed Badelia from his office to offer a few words on Congressman Honda's behalf.
Hi everyone, thank you Priya very much for introducing me. As she said, my name is Ahmed Badelia. I'm a legislative assistant for Congressman Honda. I'm here firstly to thank you very much for inviting the Congressman and to also, of course, provide his regards and his thanks for all the work that you do across the nation. So I have a statement here that's provided by him to SAALT, so I'm just going to read it out for you folks and then make a couple of personal comments as well as a Muslim American living here in America myself as well. So I'll just read it. Good morning, my friends. I want to apologize for being unable to attend this morning, especially in light of recent events that have occurred here on Capitol Hill. I refer, of course, to the so-called King hearings that took place last month. While it was unfortunate that the hearings occurred, I believe they represent an opportunity for us as a country to dig deeper and have an open conversation about who we really are. America as a country is stronger and better than what happened in mid-March. We are funded by those who are escaping religious persecution. We have in our founding documents a promise of religious and personal freedom. It is in our character, our American spirit. Yet for nearly 10 years, loyal and patriotic Americans have been consistently targeted, questioned, and demonized merely for the color of their skin and strength of their beliefs. It is in the history of our country just as much as the founding documents are. As many of you know, I come at situations like these from a different place than most people. As a young child during World War II, my family and I were confined for several years at Camp Maji, a Japanese internment camp. I was among hundreds of thousands of innocent Japanese Americans that were unjustly placed under scrutiny and suspicion. This situation came to be after years of murmurs and whispers, investigations and political grandstanding about the Americanness and the loyalty of Japanese Americans. Sound familiar? So why does this keep happening if freedom is so ingrained in our society? History has always repeated itself, and the talking heads will always drive to mass hysteria until someone stands up and says no. Until people stand up and show political leadership, even when it is hard, we're going to continue this vicious cycle. When Executive Order 9066 was signed, authorizing the internment of Japanese Americans, few in Washington were brave enough to say no when this happened. Now, decades later, I'm seeing a return to this race prejudice and war hysteria. It is the job of those in Washington, your elected leaders, to recognize the situation and take that tough stand to those who would rather discriminate. This is why what occurred last month is so disappointing and disheartening. This is why I've been standing up at the rest of you and screaming from the top of my lungs that we as a country are better than this. Fortunately, what I've seen over the past few weeks and today is an opportunity for us to listen, to educate those around us, which is why we're lucky to have community organizations like SAALT here to foster dialogue and understanding. It is my hope that with all of your leadership, we can continue this mission and really return to the core values of our country. Thank you. I just want to note, obviously, as a half Indian, half Egyptian male living here in a post-September 11th world, and obviously Muslim American as well, you know, that we are here with you. You do have friends here in Congress. You do have staffers here in Congress, and please, please feel free to reach out. You know, we understand the struggles, and every single ethnic minority in the history of this country has had to go through these issues. You know, and it really just requires alliance building and relationship building, and the necessity to always say no every single time you feel uncomfortable about these issues. And until folks are willing to do that, until folks are willing to stand up like every one of you here today, we're going to continue this vicious cycle. So thank you.
So much, Ahmed, and again, I think I speak on behalf of everyone here to again thank Congressman Honda for his leadership on these issues and for your office being so accessible to many of us here. So at this point, I'm going to ask our panelists to take their seats, and we're going to segue into our next panel, which again will move very quickly. We're on time. We're going to move very quickly, and we're going to hear a little bit about what are the solutions to some of the landscape that our panelists just laid out for us. And that conversation is going to happen next. So I'm going to have Amardeep Singh from the Sikh Coalition, Sameera Hafiz from the Rights Working Group, and Priya from SAALT, if you could come up and get settled. And I want to thank our audience for your patience and your enthusiasm and your participation. I know that I looked out at many of you and you were so moved by the stories that we heard. And I know that all of us are really in this together. So I'm excited now to turn it over to some folks who, honestly, I feel live and breathe these issues on a daily basis, but do so more from a policy standpoint, more in terms of trying to find solutions and work with legislators, work with government agencies to try to find the fixes. And so we've asked them to talk a little bit about what those fixes might be, given that here we are in Congress, and given that after this we are going to be meeting with various legislative offices. What are the asks that we can make? And how realistic is it that these asks can actually come into reality? So first I'm going to ask Amardeep, who is with the Sikh Coalition. Amardeep is also, for those of you who don't know, he is a commissioner on the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And some of you who were at the panel yesterday that Kiran Ahuja, the director of the initiative, was speaking on, mentioned that Amardeep has a forceful voice. And that is indeed true. He has been a forceful advocate, a powerful advocate for our community for over a decade. And I'm really pleased to turn it over to Amar.
Thanks so much for hearing me out today. And thanks so much to SAALT for 10 plus, but particularly over the last 10 years, very, very, very hard, dedicated work that is done with Love Only, a community-based organization that has a community that is directly impacted. It's your family who you're fighting for. In addition to your community, I'm very grateful for SAALT's work over the last 10 years. And I think, I hope during the afternoon we will come out during our meetings in Congress with some energy. And I say that, I just want to make one point about the congressional visits, and then I'll get into the nitty-gritty of the policy pieces. As I look over at the last 10 years, I think our community has had to work very, very hard to build infrastructure and capacity so that we could have interlocutors who could speak the language that people in DC like to speak, can speak at a policy level and hold their own with anyone in any community in the United States. And so I think a lot of that work in the last 10 years has been, is obviously to struggle keeping the nonprofit going, but a lot of the right interlocutors are in place. We have organizations like SAALT. We have organizations like Muslim Advocates. We have organizations like the Sikh Coalition or SAALT for United Sikhs that are able to sort of speak in the language that these folks want us to speak in, and we have very clear policy recommendations to make, very clear visions of what an America that reflects the values of our Constitution should look like as applied to our community and law and policy. What I think the piece that we're going to have to work very hard on over the next 10 years, and you guys are pioneers in making it happen a few hours from now, are really pioneers, is building the quote-unquote the network, the mass mobilization. I don't want to embarrass her, but Monami, I think, has been group Drum has been at the forefront of leading that effort in the South Asian community in New York City. But we're going to need more people who are ready to get up out of their seats, knock on doors, make phone calls, send emails so that we can begin to build community power. It's one thing for Deepa, who's very smart, very educated. So's Priya. So are a lot of folks in the room to say this is what should happen. It's another when the community gets out there and says this is what needs to happen as well. And I think what we're going to be doing in the next few hours is part of what I hope will be an area of focus over the next 10 years. So we should be revved up and clear-eyed when we come out next. In terms of policy, I'll touch upon the issues that are pressing right now with our organization, for which we have very clear policy guidance. First is the issue of unlawful profiling. You heard Prabhjit speak with quite a bit of eloquence about the experience of being profiled. And let me just say this, on that piece, so you sort of, the personal anecdote piece is important. I have a young son, his name is Azad, it means freedom, his name. And, about a year and a half ago, we were coming back from Mexico, and he was, basically I was searched and he was searched along with me, and searched meaning every single piece of his baby bag. They went through, the Elmo number 1, Elmo number 2, the mail truck. They swabbed it down. We were just made to wait there for 20 minutes. I had to hold him while he was patted down. And what I don't look forward to is a conversation with him that I know I'm going to have one day when he says, "Daddy, why is this happening?" That's why we're here, so that we don't have to answer that question in this way. So in terms of the TSA and profiling, the reason I think the TSA feels empowered to profile is because the law allows them to profile. The United States Department of Justice, right? Department of Justice, J-U-S-T-I-C-E, Justice. Their own guidance that the rest of the federal government has basically adopted as the federal government policy, Homeland Security, TSA, and the like, on profiling. Just two critiques of it that are very important. One, doesn't include religion as a protected class. So if the TSA says to you, the reason you're being pulled aside is because you are Muslim. You're Muslim. That is completely lawful. That's the law that allows Prabhjit to be profiled the way he was profiled. Second, the guidance also has a national security exemption. So they can say, well, you know, the country you're from, there's been a lot of terrorists from that country. We believe people from that part of the world are a threat to national security. That's lawful. That's lawful because the Department of Justice says so. So we have a lot to talk about this afternoon. But beyond that, in addition on the profiling issue, you know, folks should mention, I'm sure it's in the, do you guys have any notes for me? We can do relatively informal. If I'm,
You want to talk about bullying?
And then bullying, yes. On the issue of, thank you, Deepa. On the issue of profiling also, please ask folks to support the End Racial Profiling Act. I think that's enough. It gives you a sense of what it wants to do, but it would create you know, it would cover up all these loopholes that I've discussed.
Sameera is going to cover that.
Okay.
Talk about bullying?
And on bullying, on the bullying piece, there's something called the Safe Schools Improvement Act. You should be aware that as you know, the Department of Education is the largest federal agency. They have a staff of 600, their Office of Civil Rights, for enforcing laws that protect against bullying. Guess what class is not included in Title 6 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You don't have to know all that. But the whole point is that the nation's anti-bullying law does not also cover, drumroll, somebody say it, religion. It doesn't cover religion. It's a huge gap. If a local school doesn't want to do anything, we don't have a very effective federal backstop. You should know, though, having said that the U.S. Justice Department now interprets their authority to act on religion cases under another part of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964. But just so you just have a sense of the resources, you know, the office that is enforcing that particular section of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is about 20 attorneys, compared to 600 at the Department of Education who don't have a law to effectively stop bullying against our communities. So, Safe Schools Improvement Act would again cover up these very, you know, these huge gaps in the law that really leave our children vulnerable. Thanks.
Thanks, Sameera. Thank you for also framing, you know, how important it is that we are going out this afternoon to speak on the Hill. And honestly, I think beyond mentioning policy pieces of legislation, it's really just sharing our experiences and saying we're here and we're visible. So I want to turn it over now to Sameera Hafiz, who's with the Rights Working Group, another ally organization that many of our groups work with here, to speak specifically around racial and religious profiling issues. Sameera.
Thank you, Deepa. The Rights Working Group is a coalition of nearly 300 civil rights, civil liberties, human rights, immigrant rights organizations, and we're really delighted that to work so closely with SAALT and have SAALT as one of our steering committee members. So thank you for all the work you're doing for having us here today. We, Rights Working Group, lead the Face the Truth campaign, which is a campaign to end racial and religious profiling. And racial and religious profiling is unconstitutional, it's degrading and humiliating, it's ineffective as a law enforcement practice, and it decreases community trust and community safety, and it's just wrong. And we've heard from our amazing speakers in the first panel the reasons why that's the case. One of the main policy objectives of the Face the Truth campaign is the passage of the End Racial Profiling Act, also known as IRPA. So this year not only marks the 10 years since 9/11, it also marks the 10 years since the first time IRPA was introduced in Congress, but it has not yet been passed. And passage of IRPA this year would be a very fitting tribute to all of the things our communities have gone through since 9/11 and the way the landscape of racial profiling has really transformed. One of the things that IRPA does for all of us is it allows communities of color to unite. I think Monami also mentioned this. Racial profiling is something that affects African American communities, immigrant communities affected by harsh immigration enforcement policies, and post 9/11 racial profiling. It's a way for us to all come together to fight for the passage of this bill. And as we come together and remember 9/11, that's something that we can really push for as a constructive step to address the kinds of racial profiling that's going on. In its current form, IRPA enforces the constitutional right to equal protection under the law by prohibiting profiling based on race, religion, national origin, or ethnicity. It changes the policies and practices that underlie racial profiling by establishing a prohibition against racial profiling that's actually enforceable through declaratory and injunctive relief. And it mandates training to law enforcement on racial profiling, as well as mandating law enforcement agencies to collect data. In addition, it requires law enforcement agencies to develop meaningful complaint processes so that victims of racial profiling can come forward and complain to law enforcement agencies. It authorizes the development of grants by the Department of Justice for law enforcement agencies to develop best policing practices that discourage racial profiling. And it requires the AG to report to Congress on jurisdictions where racial profiling is still occurring. As I said, much has happened in the landscape in the past 10 years since 9/11. And IRPA is a really great way for us all to unite and work together. And it is a tough battle. It's not going to be easy. And others have touched on this. The way that we can make it happen is for you to tell your stories, the stories of your friends and families and community members, and talk to those that make our laws, our members of Congress, and encourage them to join the campaign to face the truth and end racial profiling through the passage of the End Racial Profiling Act. Thank you.
Thank you. So Priya, I want to turn it over to you to finish us off with some policy asks, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you, Deepa, and just on behalf of SAALT as well, I'm so honored that so many of the speakers shared their personal stories in the earlier panel to help underscore the reasons why we're making the policy asks, both here at this table and also this afternoon on the Hill visits as well. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm going to tell you about the bills that staffers should be aware of and that community members should be aware of that we should be asking for them to oppose. Because others have mentioned, obviously, the spike in anti-Muslim sentiment, anti-Sikh, anti-South Asian sentiment continues to be on the rise, and obviously that's reflected in Congress, whether it is with Congressman King's hearings that he held in the past or the series of hearings that he's going to be holding in the future. His next set of hearings is going to be focusing on radicalization of Muslims in the prison population. So it just gives us a snapshot of what's coming down the pike, and that we have to keep the drumbeat going in terms of pushing back against these types of policies and against these types of actions. There's one particular policy that I wanted to highlight, and of course it comes as no surprise that it comes from Congressman King's office, and that is the See Something, Say Something legislation. And I know that Manju earlier had mentioned the impact of iWatch in terms of the Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area. And I don't know if it is there in other parts of the country, but I know here in DC, you often hear Secretary Napolitano making her announcement about See Something, Say Something. But there are some concerns that are raised by this bill that Congressman King had introduced earlier this year, because what it basically does is that it provides immunity from civil liability for persons who report suspicious activity. And of course there's a lot of other legal language to that. But basically, if you are in a situation, many of which other panelists earlier today had outlined in terms of whether it's taking a picture or being seen as suspicious, it makes it much more easier for you to be reported without having any type of recourse. And Representative King is not the only one who has introduced a bill like this. There have been similar bills that have been introduced by other members of Congress, including Senator Collins from Maine. So this is something that will probably rear its head over and over again, and it's important for those who work at legislative offices, as well as those of us in the community, to make sure that we're pushing back against these types of policies. But I don't want to end on a negative note, so I just wanted to also mention that there is a pledge that community members can take to congressional offices that allows them to support the types of principles and policies that we know that this country is proud of holding. Things like speaking out against xenophobic rhetoric and xenophobia and hate crimes when they occur, supporting anti-profiling policies and anti-discrimination policies and bias-based bullying policies like the ones that the other panelists had mentioned, and also engaging in meaningful and constructive relationships with our communities. It's too often that the federal government, whether it is on the congressional side or it's on the administrative side, sees our communities as threats, and so wanting to engage in a real dialogue with them. So that is going to be one of the asks for those who are going on the Hill visits, to ensure that your member of Congress can endorse this pledge and make a vocal claim in support of diversity, inclusion, and tolerance, which we know that this is what this country is founded on.
Great, thank you so much, Amar, Sameera, and Priya. Sharing not just pieces of legislation, but also pledges and other ways in which we can be involved. I wanted to pause for a moment. Representative Chu, if you could please come up. I'm really excited that Representative Judy Chu has joined us. If we could give her a round of applause. Representative Chu is a pioneer before and since coming to Congress. I'm sure that many of you, especially those here from California, know about her tremendous work. She is someone who brings her experiences as an Asian American woman as one of the lenses that she uses in her work daily on behalf of all Americans. And we're also excited that Representative Chu is now the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, and she and her office and staff have been extremely accessible to community-based organizations and community members on the issues that we are talking about and are so important to us. Representative Chu, as you know, we're hosting a community briefing that looks at the impact of the continuing 9/11 moment, and it is the 10-year anniversary of September 11th this year. And we just heard before this panel a number of remarks from extremely moving remarks from speakers and panelists who have lost individuals, who are working with individuals who are detained and deported, who are experiencing bullying and harassment. And we have now heard a little bit from our experts here about policy solutions. And this afternoon, we are embarking on our legislative visits. So that's really the context that you join us in. And I want to thank you for being here. I know how busy you are, and I want to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here with you, the South Asian Americans Leading Together, SAALT. And I've known many of you through other capacities, but I'm so proud to be here now as a member of Congress, and especially proud to be here as chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. You know, it's so important for you to be here at the Capitol as we approach the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. It's important for you to fight the worst policies that occurred in the aftermath, but also to ensure that even worse hate crimes do not occur as people are reminded of the horrors of that day. I will never forget where I was on September 11th, 2001. I was in the California State Assembly and in my apartment in Sacramento, getting ready to go to the Capitol when I turned on the television and saw the unthinkable, airplanes crashing into the World Trade Center. But I'll never forget that day for another reason. the ugly hate crimes that occurred in America because of it. Only 5 days later, a Sikh man running a gas station in Mesa, Arizona was shot and killed. In San Diego, a Sikh woman was simply waiting at an intersection at a stoplight, and when a man angrily opened her car door, stabbed her in the head, shouting, "This is what you get for what you've done to us." During that year, there was a 346% increase in hate crimes, not only against people who were Arab or Muslim, but people who were thought to be Arab or Muslims, which really comes down to Sikhs and South Asians. And that is why, as chair of the Select Committee on Hate Crimes in California, I introduced AJR 64 in the California State Legislature, a resolution which condemned acts of violence and bigotry against Muslim Americans, Arab Americans, Sikh Americans, and South Asian Americans. I got an immediately tremendous response. Over 55 groups became official sponsors. But I was very anxious because I didn't know what kind of response I was going to get from my fellow legislators. Never before had such a resolution been introduced in any state, let alone in the state of California. And then the day came to present the resolution on the floor of the Assembly, and I was just very moved because legislator after legislator got up to condemn those kinds of acts and to talk about the contributions of these groups. And finally, I'm very proud to say that this resolution got a unanimous vote. And yet, as great as that moment was, I was brought down to earth quickly. You see, the resolution was presented on the same day that the 4 Americans were burned in Fallujah in Iraq. And so one Sikh American who was actually at my press conference on this resolution goes to the gas station to drive back to Los Angeles. He pays for gas and hears a commotion, and he sees a man, face beet red, sticking out his middle finger at him and shouting uncontrollably, "Take that rag off your head and go back to where you came from." I can only imagine what would have happened if that man had a gun. It shows that we have to be always vigilant and ever so proactive on fighting hate crimes. And that's why I decided to hold hearings in California about hate crimes in the Sikh community. The stories were horrific and heartbreaking. But what was even worse is that we do not have a true picture of hate crimes committed against South Asians or Sikhs due to the fact that all hate crimes committed against those thought to be Arab are lumped together. So I introduced a bill to disaggregate such hate crimes. Though that bill was held up in committee due to costs, I still believe today that it must be done, and I will always fight to make sure that it's done. Today I'm in Congress, and I'm on the Judiciary Committee, where I'm committed more than ever to ensure that all Americans are treated equally under the law. Since 9/11, however, there have been heartbreaking stories, and in fact, I was at the Judiciary hearing where Sikh Americans talked about being pulled out of lines at airports just because they were wearing a turban, and even their babies searched. And what was even more heartbreaking to me was earlier this month when 2 Sikh men in Elk Grove of Northern California were doing what they did for years, take their afternoon walk. Gurwinder Singh, age 67, Urmesh Atwal, his 78-year-old friend, right in the neighborhoods that they lived in for years when they were shot by a gun, murdered in cold blood. Not murdered for money, they were murdered for their turbans. And so now, more than ever, we must stand up against this injustice and ensure that nobody is singled out just because of the way they look, the way their name sounds, or the God they worship. Now I'm in Congress, and I'm more resolute than ever that we must protect our civil liberties from laws like the Patriot Act. Under this law, it's become legal for the FBI to wiretap a phone and listen to your conversation without court permission. They aren't just targeting terrorists, but people that they think have any connection, however remote, to terrorists. But that's not even the worst of it. This bill created the library provision, which lowers the bar and the standard of proof needed to get a court order to access your private information. Before the Patriot Act, the FBI needed to prove, using specific facts, that the target of their spying was actually a spy, an agent of foreign power. But now the FBI just has to claim that the information is relevant to an investigation. And they don't even have to tell the target that they snooped in on their private affairs. What does this mean? Potentially the FBI could, with a single, unclear, broad-reaching secret warrant, raid every house or office a suspect has visited over an entire year. Yep, every place. Your babysitter's house, your dry cleaner, even if the residents have done nothing wrong or weren't even suspects. It's like an illegal fishing expedition. Together, these provisions in the Patriot Act make a mockery of our civil liberties, letting the government spy on whoever they want for any reason without letting them know that it's being done, so they can't have a chance to challenge this in court. Now, since that law was passed, it had to be reauthorized. And thank goodness, these terrible provisions aren't permanent. Every few years or so, Congress is required to take another look at them and pass them again if they think that they are still necessary for our national security. So last year, when they were up for review, the Judiciary Committee made improvements to better protect American civil liberties. Of course, I voted for these changes in committee. However, this bill did not make it out to the floor in time for a vote, and then the November elections turned the House over to the Republicans. Now the Republicans are in control, and do you know what they want to do? They want to make these worst provisions that I just talked about permanent. That's right. They don't want to make a single change. They want to make these invasions of privacy permanent. It is not right. So when these provisions were renewed earlier this year, again with no changes, I stood up on the floor and said, enough is enough. And when it came down to cast my vote, I voted no on the bill. However, the bill did pass out of the House. It hasn't been yet taken up by the Senate, and I very much hope that the Senate will block this bill. As we get closer to the 10th anniversary of 9/11, we must also be vigilant on hearings that would accuse and divide, like the hearing held by Republican Congressmember Peter King, chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. And the topic, the supposed radicalization of American Muslims and homegrown terrorism. Now, it's one thing to hold a hearing on terrorism and extremism in general, but it's another thing to pick out a group and just look for extremism within it. The result is a conviction in the trial of the public arena, giving some in our society a chance to deepen their prejudices against Muslims, Arabs, South Asians, and Sikh Americans. And it is a chance for them to forget that people from these groups are born in America and are loyal Americans just like anybody else. And that is why the Tri-Caucus, made up of the Asian American caucus, the Hispanic caucus, and the Black caucus, went into action. We issued a joint statement condemning the hearing. And members on the committee took Congressmember King to task. Congressmember Al Green demanded that King broaden his inquiry to include the threat posed by neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan. He said, why not include the KKK in this discussion today? Why not have a broader topic that does not focus on one religion? Congressmember John Dingell said that right before the hearing, he put up a picture of Joe McCarthy right on his wall to remind him of the dangers of such a hearing. Congressmember Keith Ellison, our nation's first Muslim American elected to Congress, told the story of Mohammed Hamdani, a Muslim American paramedic who was amongst the first responders killed in the collapse of the World Trade Center on 9/11. He described how Hamdani, a 23-year-old Star Wars junkie who grew up in Queens, was actually falsely linked to the 9/11 attackers after his death, simply because of his faith. When his remains were finally discovered at Ground Zero, Hamdani was vindicated. In tears, Ellison said, Mohammed Saman Hamdani was a fellow American who gave his life for other Americans. His life should not be defined as a member of an ethnic group or a member of a religion, but as an American who gave everything